Hi guys, welcome to Talk with Nick again. It's been a long time because a lot of students have been asking me about postdoc related opportunities. So today I got an opportunity to interact with Aishwarya, who's a postdoc fellow in Purdue University, which is one of the best known universities across the world. She have done her master's from IIT Delhi and PhD from ISC Bangalore. Her background is into polymer and substances and material engineering. So thank you so much, Aishwarya. Can you tell us or introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, so hi, thank you so much, Nikunj, for having me here. And okay, my name is Aishwarya. I'm basically Keralite, but I was born and brought up in Orissa. So I completed my bachelor's from Orissa in Bhubaneswar from a central government institute in polymer science, and then I moved on to do my master's at IIT Delhi again in polymer science, and then I joined IISc Bangalore in the nanoscience department as a PhD student. So I graduated from IISc Bangalore in December 2019, and then I joined here in Purdue as a postdoc around January of 2021.
Oh, that's a really great profile. I'm sure we will get a lot of value from you for a lot of undergraduate students, masters, even PhD, who are planning to pursue their postdoc in these particular fields. So I have a, few general questions about the postdoc fellowships, and then I have few scientific questions about your research. I know that you have obtained a fellowship called. It's what's the name of the fellowship that you have obtained?
So the fellowship that I have obtained is called the Lillian Gilberth Fellowship, postdoctoral fellowship. It's a fellowship by the Purdue University. So
Okay.
it's a university fellowship. So
It's yeah, because I was reading about this fellowship, and it's quite a comprehensive fellowship because the fellowship is named after a researcher who worked in various disciplines. Like the professor was working in the area of hospitals, was working in the sports, and was trying to use psychology and in industrial development. It was a very comprehensive fellowship. And I see that you are working with the adhesive, strong underwater adhesive to be used in the hospitals and surgeries. So it's
yeah.
quite interesting. If you could give us a little bit brief about your postdoc project, and then we will talk about this in the end after we completed our general questions.
Okay. So, sure. So I basically work on development of surgical adhesives. So, basically, when you have a surgery or if you have a very deep injury, you generally stitch stitch the injuries or stitch the cuts in a surgery. So, stitching them or using staples can generally be very traumatic for the person who is going through that particular injury, and then it also has a lot of post-surgical complications, which is why we are looking forward and we are looking into how we can replace those sutures and those staples with adhesives, which are a less complicated procedure. So I basically am trying to develop surgical adhesives. So the most difficult part of working with a human body is within the human body, and when there is a surgical environment or if there's an injury, there's always blood involved. There's always a lot of wet conditions that you have to play around with, and adhesives generally are not well suited for wet environments. So the task that I have been given is to develop adhesives which can work and with some amount of reliability in wet conditions, in presence of blood, something that can also help reduce the amount of blood loss um, during a surgery. So that's what I am developing at present.
That's really interesting. So I think I will ask you a few more questions about the adhesive, and then we can later on move with these subjective
Sure.
other questions. I just and are you using synthetic materials or you're using natural materials? Because I saw in your LinkedIn profile that you are using natural compounds to build these adhesives.
Yeah. So, yeah, very good question. I'm really sorry I forgot to mention about it. So the thing is that what I am developing currently is a very natural adhesive that can biodegrade within the human body. I'm also trying to reduce any harsh solvents within the adhesive that I'm particularly using, trying to use more biocompatible solvents, something that can evaporate very quickly within a human body as well. So I generally what I am doing is I'm trying to develop adhesives which can mimic sea mussels. So sea creatures like sea mussels and sandcastle worms and barnacles. If you observe in a sea beach, you could see that these stick to rocks, and even barnacles stick to the surfaces of a whale. So they kind of stick, and they have a very permanent adhesion, and we are trying to mimic those adhesives which they are using naturally. So I'm basically trying to mimic sea mussels. So sea mussels use this particular compound which is called dopa. So it's a compound called dopamine. So I'm trying to use naturally available dopamine from various sources such as tannic acid, and even something like some compounds called catechol. So I'm trying to use those compounds within my adhesive system so that I can bring about the same level of adhesion that sea mussels are bringing about in the natural environment, in wet environments, most importantly. So that is what I am working on.
So, so you use some sort of chemistry to convert these compounds into the final product, which could be used as adhesive. Do you think that
Yes.
we could also use the marine plants, because there are some sort of diatoms or marine microalgae that are stick to the surface in the form of biofilms? They also
Yeah.
have the similar nature of the adhesive. So when we say that your sea mussels has kind of a adhesive nature and it gets stick to the surface, anything that gets sticks to the surface have that potential to be used as adhesive?
Uh, no, I wouldn't say that actually. So the chemistry that sea mussels use to stick to surfaces of rocks are is a very complicated mechanism, and it's not yet well understood. Actually, there are multiple proteins within the foot of the sea mussels, and there is a lot of complex chemistry which is going on along with the combination of those proteins. They also use a little bit of salt from iron from the seawater. They try to use a little bit of calcium carbonate from the rocks that are found in nature. So it's a very complex chemistry which they do. So and it's since it's not yet well understood, mimicking the same in a lab environment is something that is really difficult. So we're just trying to find more simpler alternatives to what they are using. It's just inspired. It's not exactly what we are trying to mimic. It's just an inspired mechanism.
Uh, Very nice. I'm really curious about this project because I am fascinated with the marine environment, and I
Okay.
enjoy reading about marine environment. And I got more interested when you are using something from the marine environment to create adhesives. It's really nice. So I don't know if this is the right question to ask this at the moment, but I thought of asking this. How do you test the capability of these adhesives or these compounds that you are trying to produce in the real life applications? Like you're going to use them in the hospital. So, what are the steps that will make you decide that, okay, this is the potential compound that can be used as adhesive? Are there some sort of experiments or some steps that you can share?
Yeah, so there are basically since we what I am trying to develop is adhesive which is to be used in a medical environment. So there are various standardized tests which, for example, if you go for an FDA approval, there are like 3 or 4 tests which they require you to comply to. You should have performed those tests. It should have had reasonable results in those tests. So one of those tests is called the lab shear strength test. So it's you the two overlap the two pieces of actually I use since I'm using in a medical environment, I'm trying to use pig skin, which is physiologically very similar to human skin. So we test those adhesives on pig skin. I also use a lot of or pig organs as well to test my adhesives, because sometimes adhesives have to be used within the human body as well, in order during a surgery at a particular organ as well. So I'm trying to test these adhesives on liver, heart, a little bit on intestines as well. So there are a lot of organs as well on which I test. So the basic tests I perform are, first is called the lap shear strength test. The second, the most important, which I'm currently using with to benchmark my adhesives, is called the burst pressure strength. So you basically have a pressurized environment, and you put an adhesive on pig skin, and you see how much pressure is required to delaminate the adhesive from the surface of the skin. So that is something that I'm testing. So burst pressure is the most important test that I am particularly focusing on, but people do a bunch of other tests like lap shear strength test. There's something called a wound closure strength test, and there's also something called a T-peel test. So these are basic tests for an adhesive, but when you are looking to in a wet environment, you have to also consider testing or at least curing your adhesive in a wet environment. So I generally try to cure my adhesives in a humidifying chamber, at at body temperature at 37 degrees centigrade, and also trying to cure adhesives, and we could also test adhesives in a universal testing machine within a moist environment, within water, within you have to develop specialized chambers with water inside. Try to stick your adhesives, try to stick the pig skin within the water, and just try to pull it off to see how much strength it has. So there's a lot of tests which you could do, but now since I'm at this point where I'm trying to benchmark my adhesive against one benchmarking adhesives one against the other, so I'm just using one standard test, which is the burst pressure strength test. That's the only test that I am currently using, but later on, I'll also try to explore other kind of tests. So that's what I'm doing. I hope whatever I'm saying is making some sense,
Well, yeah,
because
yes,
I know.
this is really, really interesting. I'm looking forward what's going to happen in next 4 or 5 years, or will there be any kind of adhesive from these natural compounds? So, what will be the? You already mentioned that you're going to do other tests. So my next question was, what's next in this area, and if there is any undergraduate or master's student who is trying to work in the area of wound healing or wound management, or is interested in the substance engineering, material engineering, and wants to enter in this kind of field. So what kind of background that undergraduate or master students should build, or what kind of skill sets a student can build in his undergraduate and master's year, like 4 to 5 years, to get opportunity in these kind of areas?
Okay, it's a very interesting question. And before I answer that question, I'll tell you a little bit about my background. So like I told in the beginning, I'm from a polymer science background. I have done nothing in my life other than study polymers. So, if you look at my trajectory, I've probably uh, switched my work a lot, because my in my masters I did polymer science, and then when I came to my PhD, my advisor was from a material science background, and although he was also from a polymer science background, but I had to do a lot of nanoparticle synthesis. I also had to do a lot of chemistry, which is very different from the polymer science that I'm a polymer engineer in the polymer science background. So engineering in polymer science is very different from what a chemist does, what a chemist works with polymers. So that's something which I had to learn doing a lot of chemistry, doing a lot of studying a little bit of material science as well. And then when I came to my postdoc, the work was again entirely different. I don't have to do a lot of chemistry, to be honest, but then the kind of testing that I do is very new, and it's something. It's not rocket science, but it's something which I had to figure out a lot, especially because uh, I am someone who, especially because this is a kind of new area even for my advisors. So my advisors have worked on adhesives for metals, wood, plastics, but they've never worked on skin. They've never worked on organs. So this is something which we are exploring together, I would say. So I don't think you need any specific background to work in this field. As long as you have a little bit of knowledge about chemistry, you have a little bit of knowledge about material science, you apply a little bit of common sense. I think this what the thing that I am working on is nothing that you would say is background specific.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I was when I was checking out your LinkedIn profile and scrolling through all the things that you have done. These were the questions that popped up in my mind. I also took some other interviews from other researchers, and they were also doing a lot of things, bits of this, bits of that, and then coming up with some unique idea. So my next question then comes like, how do you convince a professor or research team with your profile? Like, for example, your profile is so diverse and the present project that you are doing, and you have never done that in your past. So how do you convince that your profile is a suitable one for to do a postdoc in such a big university with this fantastic fellowship? Because it's very important how you can convince a professor.
Yeah, so to be honest, I this is something that always had I had in my head, and something always that I worry about, because I don't have my background is not something that is too mainstream. Polymer science is not a very mainstream background. It's not something like chemical engineering or even mechanical or even even something like materials engineering, in which you could easily find a position in, because most professors or most chemists around, most people who work in polymer science are either completely of a chemistry background, or at least someone who is of a chemical engineering or a material science background, and my background doesn't fit in any of those boxes actually. So it was this is something which I even think of an advantage which I have. It's because since I have changed streams so many times, I have become more adaptable to these things, and I am very keen to learn, because I always have it in my head that I shouldn't you know lag behind other people who, or I should always try to be at par with other people who are working in the same field as I am. So that is so, like you said, the what I would say is, during my fellowship that I was applying, I had no clue about what this project was going to be. So this fellowship that I had applied, you had to choose a mentor, and you had to write a proposal on a particular topic that the mentor had proposed. So I went through a bunch of papers that they had written, and just try to forms and try to make some sense of what they were doing and try to propose a project. It was not something that, when I look at it from I worked here for almost a year, and when I look back at what I had proposed, I feel like that was such a bogus thing to propose. But then my professors, they were convinced when I gave them the interview on this particular thing, even though they in their head they were like, okay, I mean, she's completely, I mean, she's not talking making any sense to us. But then at least you try to show them that you have put in some effort to see, to look into what they are doing, look into what potential project that you'll be working into. So I think that's something which even my advisor, when I joined, she really mentioned to me, because she was really happy that I had, when there was an interview, when there was this interview, I had made like a very brief presentation on what I would like to work on, and what are my goals, what are my targets. So she was although she said that I was not really I didn't really understand what you understood, what you had proposed during that time, but I was really happy about the fact that you really made an effort to look into what you would be potentially working on, and look into the kind of work that both of us do, and you at least made an effort to show the kind of work that you are willing to do. So
Very
that's
well
something that
said.
I would say is, just
Yeah,
put a little bit of effort. That's all.
I got your point. You said two words many times: potential and the effort. So they look more into the potential and effort of the student, and what is or her background, and how they are making up their story and coming to kind of a unique proposal. So I think all the students should focus on the potential and the effort in their undergraduate and master students to explore more and more fields. And definitely you will have some ideas when you are applying for PhD or for your postdoc. So thank you so much. And I think we will move towards a little bit about the application and general postdoc things. We have learned a lot about polymer science, material science, adhesives. So can you tell us a little bit about the process of postdoc in USA, general application requirements, and how should a student proceed forward when they're applying for postdoc in USA?
Okay, so to be honest, when I was starting off and applying for a postdoc, I wasn't very US focused because the I was more looking to into applying in in Europe, and it was just one fellowship, that one out of the two or three fellowships that I applied for, that I got in the US, which is why I joined. So what happens generally is that you either look for fellowships, or either you apply directly to a professor which you of whose paper you have read during your PhD, or someone you find you want to work with. So as for the first part, the application requirements, there are no particular requirements. There are fellowships which you have look into. Most fellowships are targeted to people who have completed PhD very recently. Uh, I think 5 years is the maximum that most fellowships look for, but there are also fellowships which are okay with, you know, you having longer than 5 year gap. But the fellowship that I am in currently, you should have finished your PhD within 2 years. So that is the requirement for my fellowship. But there are a lot of fellowships which have the five year requirement, but you'll have to just look into it. And then in the US, what happens is that most universities have their own fellowships. So you have to go to the university websites and see when their fellowships open, and try and find a host as soon as the fellowship opens, and write a proposal, work with the advisor, with your potential advisor, and submit your application. So that's what happens in US. And if you are from India, there is a fellowship called the Fulbright Nehru Fellowship, which opens once a year. I think it opens somewhere around June, July. I'm not sure, especially with the pandemic. I think the times that the timings of these fellowships have also changed. So when I was applying, I think it was June, July when the fellowship submission date was. And the advantage with applying Fulbright Nehru Fellowship is that since you Indians are the only people applying, and since it's a fellowship, very prestigious fellowship, you could always try and target a professor who is a really big shot, and most probably the professor is going to agree to taking you, because he doesn't have to pay for you. It's the fellowship, it's a very prestigious fellowship, so most professors will agree to take you. So I would say, as soon as you see the Fulbright Nehru fellowships open, you could you immediately contact your potential professor, whoever professor you think is someone you would definitely like to work with in the US. You definitely shoot a mail, and you could definitely find a professor who would agree, and then submit your proposal on time. Now, the disadvantage of Fulbright Nehru Fellowship, I think, is I know of only one, which is they pay really, really less. So you might have to work, if you are posted in a very big city such as California or in New York, you might have to ask your professor to supplement you with a little bit more scholarship. And most professors do agree, because it's not a huge sum of money, somewhere very less than $500 or something, which you are going to ask them for. So most professors do agree. So that is what I would say with Fulbright fellowship. And then the other is that what I said about applying to individual fellowships to individual universities in the US. So you just have to keep a track of when the fellowships open, and just find an advisor. Now, that is something which is really difficult to get, because unless the professor finds you as a very close match, or unless the professor doesn't have anyone else in mind, it's really difficult to find a professor within that university who would be willing to accept you, would be willing to help you apply for the particular fellowship. So that is something which you will have to look into. And if you have, if your advisor, PhD advisor, has contacts with some professor at a particular university, that's another advantage which you would have when you are trying to target fellowships. So fellowships is your best bet to find a postdoc, I would say, because if you're applying to a postdoc position just by writing an email, unless the professor has met you at a conference, has seen you deliver a poster or a talk, or at least he knows your advisor, it is very unlikely that the professor would want to take you. Or if you are from a very renowned group in India, probably he would, again, that's another consideration which he'll have to take you. But most of the places which I have applied to, they either do not have funding, especially because you're an international student. You will take time to come from India to the US or whatever country they're applying to. So they consider that timing in mind. Most often when they open a position, it's for immediate recruitment. So which is why you coming from your home country to that country might take at least 3 or 4 months. So that is another reason why I find most professors are reluctant to take international students. So, and most professors honestly may or may not have an open position at the time that you're applying. So, your fellowship, try and apply to as many fellowships as you can. Try and keep a track of when fellowships open. And in the Europe, I think there are a bunch of fellowships. There's Marie Curie, which opens around, I think it opens around April. And then there is uh, Humboldt Fellowship, which I think is a really good fellowship because it opens all year around. There is no, I don't think there is any limitation to any time limit for Humboldt Fellowship. You can apply to Humboldt Fellowship anytime you want. And then there are a lot of other fellowships from other, for specifically for there are other fellowships. I think even some Denmark, Norway, and I think these countries also have their own fellowships for international students. And there's a Swiss fellowship again in Switzerland, which opens somewhere around. I think what I would like to say is that keep a lookout for fellowships from between August to December. That's the time, at least that was a time when I was applying, that was a time when most fellowships had opened up. There's a fellowship in Belgium, which is again really great. It pays so well. So it's called it's a fellowship for Belgium. I don't really remember the name of the fellowship. So that's another fellowship that you could look for. So there are, so these fellowships generally they open during August to December, but there are a lot of other fellowships which open during other times as well. So you just have to keep a track. Try and sign up for websites like Researchers Job or scholarships.com. I don't even remember the name of those fellowships. Try and keep a track of these fellowships when they open and apply to as many fellowships as you can. Try and start applying to fellowships the moment they open, because most good professors will be taken away if you are delaying, and most professors do not allow most fellowships do not allow one professor to take more than one student. So that is another issue why a professor may or may not want to take you later on if you're applying really late. So I would say try, when if you feel like you are about to finish, you are about to write your thesis, or you are about to finish writing, immediately start looking for fellowship, start looking at potential professors you would want to target. And I think towards the beginning of your fourth year of your PhD, assuming you will finish your PhD in 5 years, you would want to think about where you want to go. Some people uh, have this thing in their mind that okay, I only want to work in Europe, I do not want to work in the US. Or some people have it in their head that okay, I only want to work in US. That's another thing. So try and look at what your what do you want to do, and then just act accordingly, I would say.
Yeah, that's a very comprehensive answer. I think I will start working on my postdoc because I'm also in my final year of my PhD. I am about to write thesis. So I will ask you for more suggestions if I have some doubts about postdoc.
Sure,
And
definitely.
it's I didn't knew all these fellowships. Like I knew, but I forgot. Okay, there is a fellowship Humboldt in Germany. I think it's from Germany, Humboldt.
Yes, it's in German.
Yes, okay,
Yeah.
that's great. Thank you very much for giving me the comprehensive answer. I think it will be very useful because a lot of students have been asking about postdoc questions like this. So finally, we have the answer on it. So I think you applied in USA for 1 to 2 fellowships, and you also applied in Europe. But
Mm.
did you get like you had options, or you just picked up the first scholarship that you got from USA, or you waited for it, or you were? How did you make your decision like that you want to do this fellowship?
Okay. Okay. To be honest, I applied to so the fellowships. I also applied to a fellowship in Ireland. I applied to a fellowship. I also applied for Fulbright, but yeah, to be honest, I picked up the first fellowship that I got. I knew Purdue University was really great to work with, and it was in the US, which I think if you are a postdoc in the US, some people say it does have like a good impression, but I don't really see why working in the Europe is not is a bad thing. But yeah, so it was honestly the first fellowship that I got, and that was the first thing I wanted to take it up because I found the work really challenging, really interesting. And yeah, this is why I picked this fellowship. So I applied to a bunch of other fellowships which I didn't get. And I applied to Fulbright, for which I got a call, but I didn't go for the interview because I already had planned to join Purdue and I didn't really want to mess up with my head by giving an interview again with Fulbright and then being confused if should go for Fulbright or if I should stay back here. So yeah,
Got it.
so
And my last question will be about the salaries of the postdoc. Um, can you give us like the brief context about salaries of postdoc in USA or across the world? How does the things work?
okay, so like I said, salaries are depend a lot on if you are on a fellowship, if you are working with a professor, if you are just working on an open position which the professor had posted, what kind of project that you're working on. So salaries generally in the US it ranges somewhere between 47,000 to somewhere about 70,000, as high as 70,000 in the 70,000 USD. So to be honest, what they generally you should as a postdoc you should get at least about 50,000. I think that's the minimum that you should be getting, but you generally do not. uh, Most professors only pay you something like 47, 48, and maybe after you finish 1 year they might give you a raise and increase it to something like 50. But initially, if you to start with, you might get somewhere around 47 to 48. That's something, 47 to 48,000 USD is something that you would get. But if you're on a fellowship, except for the Fulbright fellowship, which I think pays really bad, I think it pays somewhere around 3,000 USD. I'm not really sure, but I know the pay is really low. And especially if in a Fulbright fellowship, if you are posted in a very big city, it might be really difficult for you to survive, which is why you might want a supplement from your professor. And for the fellowship that I am here at Purdue, the year that I applied to, the salary was somewhere about 60,000 USD per year. And at a place where like West Lafayette, where Purdue is in, at 60,000, you would live like a king because such a cheap city, and there's not too much to distract you. There's not too much entertainment to distract you, uh, and there's not too much shopping that you can do. So that's something which I found was really a great advantage for me because I could save up a lot here. And then I think from this year onwards, what I saw was my fellowship is offering 70,000 USD instead of 60,000 USD. So that's something which is really, really high, especially for a university like Purdue. at a place like West Lafayette, that's a really high fellowship. But I think also it also depends on, I think your salaries also depend on your experience. If you're a more experienced postdoc, probably you could find a better fellowship, you could find a better salary. And some federal, if you are working in a federal lab, such as a national lab, such as if you're working in somewhere like Oak Ridge National Laboratories, or even Pacific Northwest Laboratory and laboratories, national laboratories, I think they give you the visa that they give you is an H-1B visa. Even if you are a postdoc, they give you an academic H-1B. And for H-1Bs, I think the minimum salaries that you should get is, I think, somewhere about 60,000 USD. That's a minimum that you would get. So if you are applying to a federal lab, if you get to a federal lab, I think you would be paid much better. And but then in a federal lab, there are publication limitations and a lot of security based limitations which you would have, which is another thing you would have to consider if you want to go there. And if you are, if I think even some I think NIH fellow, if you are joining an NIH facility or NIH lab, I think you get paid even better, somewhere close to 70,000-80,000 dollars again. So it totally depends on where how much experience you have. If you're an experienced postdoc, if you what place you are living, what fellowship you apply to, that also matters. If you are that also depends on how much you are going to earn. But yeah, it's not a good pay, but you could,
Yeah.
if you are Indian, you could live comfortably.
That's great, because I had no idea about how the postdocs and the salaries things work. So it's good to know all these details. I will try to stay focused on how things work in postdoc across the world. But I think we have got a lot of valuable information for all the students who are in PhD in India and are planning to apply for postdoc, or are planning to study the subjects in polymer science, material science, or trying to develop the adhesives. So Aishwarya, thank you so much for coming into my show, Talk with Nick. I hope that this video brings a lot of value to the students back in India or all across the world who are working in these subjects. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to talk to you.
I'm going to stop the video now.
Sure.
Oh, 1 second.